Haven't already?
I think we have a
Um,
couple more people to admit. For some reason, they're
okay, I will admit them. Thank you. My name is Brian Lepask. I'm the Chief of Program Services at OPSC. With me today facilitating is Tracy Sharp. She's an operations manager in our Program Services division. Tracy and I are going to be facilitating the meeting and helping out with questions. We have just one topic today. It's something that we've brought to you previously, but it's been a while. It was, I think, like last summer. We're talking about updates to the facility hardship and seismic mitigation program regulations. Hannah Konoff is going to be presenting for OPSC today. We also have updates to our cost estimating form that we use in that program, and it's actually one of our regulatory forms. Some of them aren't. This one is a regulatory form, so it's a very formal form that we need to make changes to. That's the 5801, the cost estimate form that goes along with those facility hardship and SMP projects. When we brought this item forward last summer, we really didn't get a ton of feedback on it, which I guess is a good thing. But we wanted to make sure that we were refreshing you on those topics and some of the things that we were looking at back then. Nearly all of the feedback that we did get, we've made changes accordingly to them. So it was a lot of really good feedback. And that's outlined in the chart in the item for today's meeting. So we'll be going over all those. There's also some new stuff that we wanted to bring forward that have occurred since then. So we're going to be kind of looking at both of those things. Also, while this isn't a shiny new Prop 2 program or a Prop 2 program amendment, this program is really important. It's a health and safety program. We're mitigating imminent health and safety risks. A lot of times these projects come out of nowhere, and they could be disruptive. So please consider the importance of what we're addressing today. We want to make sure that we get these changes right because the stakes are high, and we want to make sure that we're keeping our schools safe. So I'm really thankful to all of you that are here and that are going to be offering your insight today. We really appreciate it very much with this critical program. Looking forward to this discussion. Please feel free, like I said, to enter questions in the chat as we go. And at the end, we'll be taking them verbally if you wish to do that instead. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah. Let me get my screen shared here. Give me 1 second. Should be seeing that now. Wrong screen.
It's there.
Sorry. Oh, was it the right? Hold on 1 second. There we go. Okay. How's that look?
Looks good.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's stakeholder meeting to discuss proposed amendments for the SFP regulations related to the facility hardship and seismic mitigation programs. Many of these amendments are a necessary result of the voter approval of Proposition 2, otherwise known as AB 247, the kindergarten through grade 12 schools and local community college public education facilities modernization, repair, and Safety Bond Act of 2024. Proposition 2 repealed and replaced the old Education Code section 17075.10, which provides the authority for both the facility hardship and seismic mitigation programs, as well as providing authority for the excessive cost hardship grant for urban locations, security requirements, and impacted site. You can find the text of both the old and new versions of Education Code 17075.10 in attachment A for the agenda item for this meeting. So the new version of 17075.10 still provides the authority for the facility hardship and seismic mitigation program and sets forth requirements for the funding applications. Most of the following requirements were also included sorry, lost my place. We're also included in the old version. So first, in order to qualify for hardship funding, the district must demonstrate that the school facilities pose a threat to the health and safety of pupils. Health and safety projects include the replacement of facilities that are identified as being of the most vulnerable Category 2 building type. For facilities that pose an unacceptable risk of injury in a seismic event, the district must demonstrate that due to unusual circumstances beyond the district's control, excessive costs need to be incurred in the construction of the facilities. And that the facilities are needed to ensure the health and safety of pupils. The district is required to prepare a cost-benefit analysis to determine if the cost to rehabilitate the existing facility is at least 50% of what it would cost to replace it. If the cost is 50% or more, the district will qualify for funding to replace the existing facility, and that authority is going to come out of new construction bond authority with a minimum 50% state share and 50% required district match. If the cost to rehabilitate the facility is less than 50% of the replacement cost, the district will qualify for funding to rehabilitate based on modernization bond authority with a minimum 60% state share and 40% required district match. So the most significant change for the facility hardship and seismic mitigation programs is that in the old version of Ed Code 17075.10, it specified that all seismic mitigation program funding for both replacement and rehabilitation was based on that new construction bond authority with a 50% state share and 50% required district match. Going forward with the new version of 17075.10, seismic mitigation rehabilitation projects will receive at least 60% state funding. The other significant change in the new version is that it no longer provides authority for the excessive cost hardship grant for urban locations, security requirements, and impacted site. In addition to the changes for 17075.10, Proposition 2 also added Education Code Section 170.59, which established a point-based determination and a sliding scale for the required state and local match for SFP projects, and amended Ed Code Sections 17072.30, which authorizes new construction funding, and 17074.16, which authorizes modernization funding, to include that new sliding scale. The new scale will also apply for facility hardship and seismic mitigation program funding. OPSC staff previously presented proposed amendments to SFP regulation sections 1859.77.1 for new construction and 1859.79 for modernization at stakeholder meetings on January 30th and March 13th of this year. So in June of last year, OPSC held stakeholder meetings to discuss many of these proposed amendments to SFP regulations, including sections 1859.61, 1859.82.1, and 1859.82.2, as well as to the application for funding, Form SAB 5004, and the facility hardship cost estimate, Form SAB 5801. Those proposed amendments were chiefly intended to clarify and standardize SFP regulations governing the facility hardship and seismic mitigation programs, and to improve user readability and experience of those regulations. OPSC is bringing back those proposed changes from that June 2024 meeting with the incorporation of most of the stakeholder feedback. That feedback, as well as OPSC responses, is listed on a chart that begins on page 11 of the agenda for this meeting. OPSC has reviewed the changes that Proposition 2 made to Ed Code Section 17075.10 and finds that the new version of the statute continues to support the existing facility hardship and seismic mitigation programs, except in that seismic mitigation rehabilitation funding will be funded at a minimum of 60% state share going forward. As I noted previously, OPSC is bringing the proposed amendments from last year back to this meeting, except that the amendments to the application for funding, Form SAB 5004, are no longer included and will instead be added to a future proposal that will make several other changes to the form based on other requirements related to Proposition 2. So For the agenda for this meeting, we have attachment B that includes, well, I already discussed attachment A, which has both the new version and old version of the education code. And then we have attachment B, which includes all of the proposed regulation amendments related to facility hardship and seismic mitigation programs. And attachment C presents the proposed amendments to the facility hardship cost estimate form SAB 5801. The proposed changes for the regulations based on Proposition 2 can be summarized as follows. Changes to the matching share for seismic mitigation projects. The old version of Ed Code Section 17075 required that all seismic mitigation funding was provided on a 50% state share and 50% matching district share. This still applies for any applications that were received October 30th, 2024 or earlier. The new version changes the funding for seismic mitigation rehabilitation to a minimum 60% state share and a maximum 40% required district match. And this applies for all applications received October 31st, 2024 or later. This change, of course, requires the amendment of SFP Regulation Section 1859.82.2 to detail the new state and district shares and to distinguish which version of Ed Code applies based on the OPSC receive date. Another change that is not being addressed in this meeting, but has been addressed previously on January 30th and March 13th, is the creation of the new sliding scale for modernization and new construction funding levels. So that new system will also apply for facility hardship and seismic mitigation, but it is addressed in separate regulatory sections. The other thing that's really changed is that because the new version of 17075.10 does not include subdivision C, which justified the grant for the urban construction, we've had to amend the regulations so that that grant is still available for any applications that we received October 31st or October 30th, 2024 or earlier, but it is not available for anything received October 31st or later. One other thing that Proposition 2 added was Education Code Section 17075.2 that creates assistance for interim housing for school districts impacted by a natural disaster for which the governor has declared a state of emergency. This section also specifies that if the state allocation board determines that a district has been impacted by a natural disaster for which the governor has declared a state of emergency, that district is deemed to meet the requirements set forth in Education Code 17075.10 as well. Therefore, OPSC also proposes amendments to Section 1859.82.1 to specify that for applications received on or after October 31st, 2024, a district may qualify for facility hardship program funding if it submits documentation to demonstrate that the district either has been or will be determined by the board to meet the requirements forth in Ed Code Section 17075.20. Regulations that are directly related to that new education code section will be discussed at a future stakeholder meeting currently planned for April 3rd. So moving on, we still have the amendments that were previously proposed last year. And again, these amendments were chiefly intended to provide consistency and to clarify program requirements. These include consistent use of the defined term governmental agency, which was proposed by one of our stakeholders, and we really appreciate that. It's a good change. Clarification of SFP Regulation Section 1859.93.1, new construction project funding order. We're changing that to include references to sections 1859.82.1 and 1859.82.2. We're clarifying section 1859.61L, and that governs adjustments to the modernization eligibility baseline for sites that receive replacement funding. We've added language to clarify when asbestos mitigation costs are allowable for facility hardship projects. And we have further defined eligible funding for rehabilitation projects and added some amendments and clarification for the facility hardship cost estimate form SAB 5801. So SFP regulation section 1859-2, definition of governmental agency, is the first item on attachment B, but we're not proposing any changes to that section. All we're doing is including it for clarity because we have changed over to that term throughout sections 1859.82.1 and 1859.82.2. The amendments for SFP regulation section 1859.61L, adjustments for the modernization baseline as a result of facility hardship or seismic mitigation replacement funding. As it's currently written, section 1859.61L requires a school board resolution in all instances in order to adjust the modernization baseline for a site that's received replacement funding. That resolution should only be required for a case where a site has a building that would be eligible for replacement funding, except that the site does not have sufficient current enrollment to justify replacing it. And the district has chosen to keep the building on the site instead of demolishing it and has removed that building permanently from K-12 use. Therefore, we are proposing reorganizing and renumbering the current language and changing the language to state the requirements more clearly so that the school board resolution is only required under a newly created section 1859.61 L2B, which is in alignment with our current process. So a change that we're making to section 1859.82.1 related to mitigation of asbestos. Had first proposed adding language to 1859.82.1B2A at that June 2024 stakeholder meeting to state that mitigation of asbestos that becomes friable in the course of maintenance, repairs, or modernization is not eligible for facility hardship program funding. After further review and some stakeholder feedback, we've adjusted the language for clarity and moved it to the second introduction paragraph for section 1859.82.1 with the other general program guidelines. And we're proposing updating section 1859.82.1B2A to state that the lab test required for asbestos mitigation should identify the presence of asbestos, and that the industry specialist report should indicate that the asbestos is friable. Currently, the language states that the lab test should indicate that the asbestos is friable, but that's not actually something that a lab test normally determines. Staff also clarifies that if friable asbestos is encountered in the course of a separate qualified facility hardship or seismic mitigation project, the costs for that mitigation can be included as part of the minimum required work on the form SAB 5801, because that work is required in order to get all of the necessary approvals to fix the other problem that actually qualifies. So for both SFP regulation sections 1859.82.1 and 1859.82.2, we make changes to clarify the calculation methodology for base grant funding for the replacement of one or more buildings when it's just one or more buildings, but not all of the buildings on the site. Currently, regulations say that funding will be based on the square footage of the school buildings replaced, which is the original building that qualifies for replacement funding, and is capped by the lesser of the amount provided in accordance with the chart below. Of course, it's way below, but it's there. And the square footage constructed. That is the square footage in the new replacement building. Staff proposes amendments to help make this more clear and to ensure that the wording for these calculations is the same in both 1859.82.1 and 1859.82.2. Now I'm going to give you some examples of how those calculations work. For our first example, we're going to talk about a multi-purpose room that is below the minimum size listed on the chart. On the chart, the minimum size for an elementary school multi-purpose room is 4,000 square feet. If we have an elementary school with an existing multi-purpose room that is only 3,500 square feet and it qualifies for replacement, so long as the district is building back 4,000 square feet or more, the replacement funding will be limited to 4,000 square feet. We can't fund more than that because the original building was not more than that, but we will fund it up to that 4,000 square foot minimum. If the district only built back 3,500 square feet though, then the funding would be limited to what was actually built back, that 3,500 square feet. Our second example is an existing gym that is between the minimum and maximum sizes listed on the chart. I believe that the gymnasium is the only facility where we list a maximum size. But in any case, on the chart, the minimum size for a high school gym is 8,380 square feet. So even a very tiny high school should have a gym that is at least that 8,380 square feet. While the maximum that we will fund is 18,000 square feet. Even if the enrollment would justify a bigger gym than that, 18,000 square feet is all we're going to fund, or all our program is going to fund, I should say. So our example high school has an existing gym that is 16,000 square feet and qualifies for replacement. That 16,000 is more than the 8,380. So we don't need to worry about bringing it up to the minimum. The site enrollment for that high school is 1,200 pupils, which calculated at 15.3 square feet per pupil would justify up to an 18,360 square feet gym, except of course that the replacement funding cannot exceed that 18,000 square feet. The district is actually replacing the gym with a new one that is 20,000 square feet. But because the original gym being replaced was 16,000 square feet, the program will only fund that total of 16,000 square feet for the new gym. And our third example, and by far the longest, is for the replacement of classrooms. It takes at least 2 steps to calculate replacement classrooms. First, you have to determine the number of classrooms that are eligible for replacement. And then you have to convert that number of classrooms to square footage using the chart square footage allowed per classroom. So first, to determine the number of eligible classrooms, you will need to use the enrollment, and the enrollment is typically either based on the average of the previous 3 years or the current year and the previous 2, so a total of 3 years, or just the previous year, whichever one is a better advantage for the district. So you take that enrollment and you divide it by the loading standard for the age groups or the grade levels served. Then you have to count all of the classrooms that are in other buildings on the site that are not being replaced. And you have to deduct those classrooms from that site-wide total that you got based on loading standards. That gives you the maximum number of classrooms that can be funded for replacement. So if we have an elementary school with 750 K6 pupils, you would divide the 750 by the K6 loading standard of 25 pupils per classroom, and that would justify a total of 30 classrooms for the site. But for our elementary school example, the site actually only had 21 classrooms to start with, and they were all in the buildings that were eligible for replacement. Because there are only 21 classrooms to replace, even though the enrollment would justify more, replacement funding is limited to the original 21 because you can't replace something that did not originally exist. So if your district is actually constructing 25 classrooms, 21 of them can be included in the facility hardship or seismic mitigation application. The extra 4 classrooms would be considered additional capacity, and the district can either fund those locally, or it could potentially submit a second funding application for new construction program funding for those additional 4. If the site was a little bit different and it originally had a total of 25 classrooms, 21 of them were in buildings that are eligible for replacement through seismic mitigation, for instance, and the other 4 are being demolished and replaced in the project, but are not eligible for the seismic mitigation funding, the district could potentially submit a separate application for modernization funding based on like-kind replacement for those remaining 4. So again, going back a step now, once you've determined the total number of classrooms eligible for facility hardship or seismic program replacement, the next step is to convert that number to square footage. So in our example of the elementary school that had 21 classrooms, let's assume that the enrollment for kindergarten justifies 2 kindergarten classrooms and 19 classrooms serving grades 1 through 6. The chart allows up to 960 square feet for each standard classroom for grades 1 through 12. So your 19 classrooms for grades 1 through 6 would become 19 times 960, or 18,240 square feet for the standard classroom replacement. For kindergarten classrooms, the chart allows up to 1,350 square feet. So we would add that 2 times 1,350, or a total of 2,700 square feet more. So in total, the project can be funded up for up to 20,940 square feet of classroom space. So some additional proposed amendments for sections 1859.82.1 and 82.2 further define eligible funding for rehabilitation applications. So these are intended to further outline how rehabilitation funding is provided for applications that replace components such as a septic system or an existing heating or cooling system, or an unenclosed roof structure such as a lunch shelter, shade structure, or covered walkway. Previously, we had used the word like kind to say that it has to be the replacement component or structure has to be like kind, but stakeholder feedback told us that that was a little bit confusing. So we've replaced that with the term equivalent when referring to replacement components or unenclosed roof structures. The goal is to clarify that necessary or required safety code or material upgrades that are necessary in order to obtain plan approval from DSA or from another governmental agency that has jurisdiction for the project can be funded, but elective systems or features that are not required for plan approval cannot be funded. So then we come to our proposed amendments for the Facility Hardship Cost Estimate Form SAB 5801. Overall, the amendments for this form are designed to make the form more consistent with the Sierra West Publishing's construction cost publications. OPSC has reviewed these changes with Sierra West on several occasions to ensure that we're making them accurately. One of the bigger changes was related to how general conditions funding is calculated. In years past, this was based on the OPSC allowance subtotal from the form itself. OPSC has changed this so that now the general conditions funding is calculated based on the total project cost reported to DSA. We did receive some stakeholder feedback that they did not like this change, and they believe that the general mitigation, that the general conditions should still be based on only the work funded through facility hardship or seismic mitigation program funding, as opposed to the total project cost for the DSA approved plan set. The reason that we're intending to move forward with this change is that it is more in line with the Sierra West publications, and it also more accurately reflects the economy of scale achieved for the entire project when the facility hardship or seismic mitigation funding covers a limited portion. And with that, I think we can open up to questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for that summary. That's a lot of information, a lot of really good information. Thank you very much. As I'll continue to kind of walk through this a little bit at a time, I'm still sharing my screen. If anybody has any comments, this is the stakeholder feedback that we received. Like I said in the introduction, we accepted most of it. The only exception to that is what Hannah just mentioned. The rest of it we've actually incorporated into our changes today. So there is a lot of information here, and not only in the cover item, but the regulations and forms. I don't know if many of you out there in the audience had a chance to look at this prior to the meeting. If not, that's okay. You know, we're really open to answering any questions you might have right now. But also, if you want to take some time to go back and look at it a little bit more thoroughly, please do so. And then for the next 2 weeks, we'll be accepting feedback in response to this meeting and this item that we'll incorporate into the next version. Our hope is to wrap this topic up at our next meeting. However, if we do need another 2 meetings, we'll do that as necessary. But we're hoping to kind of solidify these regulations today and then maybe just make some tweaks. If there are significant changes, we'll definitely bring them back and run them by everybody before we send them to the SAB for approval. So I can just kind of scroll through here a little bit. This is a lot of the stuff that we talked about last time. We don't want to rehash it because we've already discussed it, but it's all in the item for you to look at. There was only one question so far in the chat, and it was related to the removal of the urban supplemental grant. As Tracy mentioned, we don't have background on that right now. It was part of the legislative process, pardon me. Are aware of it though, and we're making changes accordingly. Anyone out there with a question? Trusting that everybody is okay with these changes. I'm not seeing any activity out there. Again, please review these regulations if you have projects coming in the program or have any interest in this program. Like I mentioned at the start, this is a critical program that we run, and we very carefully process these applications with a lot of care. Not that we don't process all of our other applications with care, but these get special attention because they're health and safety aspects, and it's stuff that is critical to get funded as quickly as possible and to make sure that we fund them correctly. So we've taken a lot of time and painstaking effort to review our proposed changes and to develop these changes. And we learn a lot in every one of these applications. They're all very unique. But if there's anything that you're seeing where we can make further improvements, or if you see typos or anything like that, please point them out to us. And like I said, we'll be accepting formal feedback for the next 2 weeks. Ilana has a question. For modernization, like kind means replacing the same amount of square footage regardless of usage. For facility hardship, it appears that the usage of the square footage must be the same. Is that correct? That's a good question. I'm going to defer to the team on that, what our current practice is. I think that we do replace it in like kind, not only building area, but usage. Is that how we've been handling those, Hannah?
So there's 2 different types of replacement that this could be referring to. So I'm going to address the first one first, which is when we're funding replacement of interior building space. So yeah, if your building that qualifies as a multi-purpose room, we will fund its replacement with another multipurpose room. If it's a classroom, we will fund the replacement with another classroom. The only kind of space that can be potentially replaced and serve a somewhat different purpose than it did before would be what we consider the other space. And that is typically things like hallways or, certain really super specific kinds of space that do not fall into any of the other categories in our chart. So you could be replacing a building that had 10,000 or, 300 square feet of hallway, and you could replace that building and not replace any of the hallway. Your new configuration doesn't have hallway, but it has big closets. And so you could apply that 300 square feet that was hallway to closet. That's about the only place where we wouldn't require the same usage. The other type of replacement would be when we're funding a rehabilitation project and we're replacing, say, a covered walkway.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you're not actually building back their covered walkway, then demolition of the existing covered walkway would kind of be the minimum work. So we wouldn't be funding replacement of a covered walkway with a shaded, a shade structure that wasn't a walkway.
Right. Yeah, that sounds right to me too. And I know not just in this program, but in all of our programs right now, well, SFP and this component of the health and safety projects, we're looking at allowance of space that's required by Title V, or perhaps by DSA for approval. So there are some exceptions to that, but it's kind of a narrow exception. Josh reminded me of that, so thank you, Josh. Rob Murray is asking, do we have an idea when the new forms will be adopted and available? And as Tracy mentions in the chat, the forms are in place as they were approved by the SAB, and then the will be in place as approved by the SAB and the OAL, who's going to, they're the approvers in that rulemaking process. Depending on when we finalize these regulations and get them to the SAB, will dictate the timeline. Like I said, we're hoping the next meeting will be our final meeting on this topic, or hopefully it will be. If we're able to do that, then I'm guessing we'll bring this topic back somewhere around May, and we can get those regulations to the board after that. So if we don't need to come back at all, we might be able to do it a little bit quicker. If we need a couple of additional meetings, it might take a little bit longer. But we're going to turn those around to the SAB and then send them into the rulemaking process as quickly as we can.
Yeah. And I was speaking, Brian, also before we get to that next question, of the variety of changes that are happening in Prop 2. And as the stakeholders who are listening, who've been following our prior meetings, is, as you know, there are a lot of different things happening. There are supplemental grants, various ones that are being put in place. And so when I say phases, it's like, we're taking a piece at a time and incorporating it. And so each of those has to go through the board approval and regulatory process. So you may not see like a brand new 5004 all in one shot. That it will come, but potentially in phases. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Kind of,
yeah.
So that people are, when they see a change, they might be asking themselves, well, wait a minute, what about the rest of them? Well, it's a process that we have to go through to make sure that every single item is, as I mentioned, board approved and then goes through the official regulatory process.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlapping changes, and so we'll be a little, thoughtful about that as well. But it is our goal to get them done as quick as we can. Good morning, Jamie. Jamie asks, would a building that qualifies for the program be eligible for demolition only? Sometimes these buildings don't require reconstruction, considering declining enrollments or some other things. Yes, you can apply for funding for that. I guess it could be, you could say that's the minimum way to remove the threat in certain cases. There's also another facet of that I might mention, and that's like, let's say you have a classroom wing that has, let's say there's a school with 10 classrooms and they really only need 8 for their enrollment, and all 10 classrooms need to be replaced. So we would only fund replacement of 8 of those out of the 10. So the other 2, you'd be able to get demo funding for those to remove them, but we wouldn't pay you replacement funding. So I think that goes along with that one. Yes, and Tracy mentions if that's the minimum work required and if it's a Field Act approved building, it must be a Field Act approved building. It's another aspect of
Hi,
that.
Brian, I don't mean to reiterate what you're saying, just adding it into the chat for the record as well.
Yeah, thank you. Great. All right, anyone else this morning? While we're waiting for another couple questions to roll in, I believe our next meeting is April 3rd. There's a few topics on that one. I'll see if I can look them up quickly and get that information for you. I know that we're having a lot of these meetings, but as I've mentioned before, these are integral to the process of getting really good rules. And so all of you that have been participating, we really sincerely appreciate it and hope that you continue to attend. A little bit less participation today in the chat. I only see about 90 people in there. I still take that as a big win. And you know, as always, I know that a lot of you are we can see the numbers that people are looking at these after they go online, and just again expressing a gratitude for all the time you spend with us and the help that you're lending to us. Okay, so we have our SAB coming up next week, and then the next stakeholder meeting is set for April 3rd. It's going to be from 9 to noon. Looks like we have 5 topics for that meeting. We're going to be talking about the 75-year-old replacement building grants. We're going to be bringing back the 5-year facility master plan topic, minimum essential facilities supplemental grants, transitional kindergarten supplemental grants, and the interim housing and disaster relief item. That's a lot of stuff to look at. I think we have regulations for a good amount of those. It's the second meeting on those topics. We've introduced those previously. So maybe take some time. That's about 2 weeks from today. So maybe take some time to brush up on them. And we'll be really raring to go on that day. These are some prime time topics for that meeting. So we're looking forward to that one. And then I believe the next meeting after that is for April 17th, and I'm not quite sure if we know the exact topics on that one yet. So we'll be getting that information out to you as soon as we can. Okay, I'm seeing no hands. I'm seeing no more chat questions. I think I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to any feedback. Everybody have a great day and a great weekend. I'm picking Houston, and I think actually I have 3 brackets: Houston, Duke, and Auburn to go all the way. I know those are top seeds, probably popular choices, but those are my picks for this next few weeks of March Madness. So everybody enjoy those games and have a great weekend. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, everybody.